All right, welcome everybody. It is November 8th, 2018. This is the weekly Kubernetes community meeting. Thank you for joining us. This is our weekly public meeting where we discuss all things going around in the project. As usual, we'll be streaming and recording this meeting to YouTube, so please be cognizant that everything you say will be streamed out for the internet. A few things, if you're not speaking right now, please ensure that your mute button is on. We'd really appreciate that. And also looking for someone to help with the notes. So I will plop the URL to the notes in the chat. And since I am streaming and hosting at the same time, I would really appreciate some help today. Thank you. All right, so we have a quick demo with Steve's going to do Ingress Route, and then the usual release updates, important week in release this week. And we have 3 SIG updates today. After Aaron's little contributor tip of the week, we'll be doing a Sig Cluster Lifecycle, Sig OpenStack, and Sigoff. So with that, let's get started. Steve, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks, George. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is a thing called Ingress Route with Heptio Contour. So Ingress Route is a CRD that we're using to help solve some new interesting problems with ingress into your cluster. Again, it's a Contour is an ingress controller that leverages Envoy as the data plane. It features dynamic updates, so all the configuration changes happen to Envoy from Contour without any dropped connections. It was built from a co-development project with Yahoo Japan Corporation, subsidiary Actapio. If you're curious how they are using this in their environment, along with another project we've done called Gimbal, you can check out their KubeCon talk in Seattle this December. We've also done a fair amount of performance testing around this. And if you're interested in that, you can go see Alex Brand's talk on this KubeCon as well. And there's links to there if you're interested. So a quick overview of how Contour works and kind of generically. Requests come in from the internet, and they hit some L3, L4 load balancer, and basically get routed to Envoy. So again, Envoy is our data plane component. It's the component that's going to be handling all the traffic between the endpoints. Contour acts as a server in this scenario. So when Envoy spins up, it looks out for its server, which is Contour. And Contour is then watching all of the resources in Kubernetes. It's looking for services, endpoints, secrets, all of those information bits. It basically creates a configuration and passes that off to Envoy via gRPC. So that connection happens, again, real time without dropping connections. And then once the request hits Envoy, it routes it over to the upstream in the cluster, and the request is fulfilled. So I'm going to go through a scenario right here. I can't show you everything that we're going to talk about, but I'm going to pick on one little thing, which is a multi-team kind of scenario. So in this example here, we have 2 ingress resources. We have team A and we have team B. And each team deploys their own ingress resource to their own namespace. And if you'll see here, they're both using heptio.com as the host and both referencing blog as the path. So, but the upstream they're going to send the traffic to are different services. So team A is using WordPress and team B is using this private service. So the real question is what happens, right? When these resources get created, what should the ingress controller do? Really, it's kind of undefined, right? And there's danger in this as well. We've had customers at Heptio that have done this and have taken out production systems, unknowingly, just because of some of these shortcomings that we run into. So some of the goals we wanted to do with Ingress Route was to basically solve some of these issues that we just discussed. So multi-team Kubernetes clusters, having multiple users, multiple teams within the same cluster operate on their own without having to go through other admins. And we can do this through a thing called delegation. So delegation helps us solve that multi-team configuration, and we'll discuss this here in a second. It also lets us split out secrets from different places, so we don't have to let secrets sprawl all over our cluster. We can tuck our TLS certs away in a namespace and leave them there. Our other goal was to provide a sensible home for configuration params, right? Things like service weights, load balancing strategies, all of those things to try and reduce the number of annotations that we have and put them in the spec in a proper space. So here's how delegation is going to work, and this is going to solve our multi-team problem here. So this is kind of modeled after DNS. So we have this root ingress route here, right? And it has authority over heptio.com. And then we can pass that authority off to other folks within the cluster, right? So in this example, the /blog path has authority to handle that resource because the root has delegated that to it. If we look at a scenario where someone else wants to also use /blog path, they can't do that, right? Because Contour is going to look at that and say, hey, you don't have the proper authority, the proper delegation. So that way it'll throw it out, and then nothing's going to break within your cluster. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and how this looks for real. So what I have here is this is my Ingress route. You'll see this. It's for a marketing website, right? So if I go to marketing.containerc.com, what we're saying is that we're going to match all paths, the slash, and we're going to send it to the www service upstream, right? So let's go take a look at how that looks here quickly. Here you can see this is the marketing page, right? So that's pretty straightforward. That's just to get us started. Now what I want to do is I want to delegate. I want to pass off to the marketing team. They want to spin up a blog. So what we'll do here is we'll turn on this delegation and we'll say anything to the /blog, we'll route to the blog ingress route and the namespace marketing. Again, right now I'm living in this root ingress route namespace. So this is like an admin namespace. But here I'm going to pass off to this team marketing and let them manage this themselves. So what we can do is we can save that. And if I go ahead and apply this ingress route, okay, now it's there. So now if we go to /blog, we should see the new blog that we spun up, right? So here's our blog website. Cool, so that works. So in the same scenario, if we have someone who wants to, again, claim that same path, so here, this is the blog to Ingress route, and they also want to claim that same blog. So if we go ahead and we apply this one, what we'll see is that nothing should break. So if I go ahead and get my Ingress routes in marketing, what we'll see is that we have two, right? We have one, which is our valid one. You can see the other one has the status of orphaned, right? No one's delegating to it. So what that means is that Contour saw this and threw this out. So right now, our application is not broken. Everything's still functioning properly. This invalid one isn't being sent traffic, though. So what we can do is we can change this out, right? So if I make this foo, it's now changing the path on this ingress route, which is making it unique. But at the same time, even though it's unique, it still doesn't have any delegations to it, right? We check the status of foo now, it still not part of a delegation chain. So to make this accurate, make this function, we'll go ahead and delegate to it. So we'll hop down to here, and we'll go from the root, and we'll say, all right, the root now can delegate to foo, and this thing will apply correctly. So we will go ahead and delegate to foo, and then we will apply this root one again. Now that we've passed off that delegation, now our ingress route should be valid if I check its status. And now it is. And we can validate this here really quickly by going to foo. Right, cool. So now that's working. Cool. The final thing I want to demonstrate really quickly in relation to delegation is a thing called blue-green deployments, right? And that's where we have a current version, and we want to migrate to a new version. So what I have already set up is I have a blue deployment, which is living here at blue, and I have a green one, which is here. And what we can do is we have a blue-green namespace now. And this is our production application, right? And right now what you can see is that we're using the blue version. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a curl on this, and you'll see that this is going to loop forever. Right? It's handling the blue version. And what we'll do is we'll go into our root here, and right now you can see that right now blue-green is pointing to the blue deployment. So what I will do is we'll swap this now. So all the blue things will happen. Let's make this so you can see it. There we go. We'll go ahead and we'll swap this from blue to green. And all we're doing is swapping delegation. And because the power of this delegation piece, we can now implement this piece. So if I swap to green, you'll see now that this should switch to green. There goes the green one. If I watch my metrics and see that things are breaking and the new version is not functioning correctly, what I can do is go ahead and apply the root back. We switched back from blue back to green, or from green back to blue, I'm sorry. And now we're back on the blue version. You can see this popping through. So that's a powerful way we can use delegation to also manage that. So really quickly to summarize, we have some resources here if you're interested to follow up more. We have a GitHub repo, which you can go check out the source code. Joe did a TGIK last week on this. You can check the link there. We have some specifications about how Ingress Route works. And please find us in Contour in the Kubernetes Slack if you have more questions. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Steve. Does anybody have any questions? We have about a minute for questions. Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, all right, we have release updates next from Aish. I think I see you back there.
All right, you're good.
There's some feedback there.
Oh, nice. There you go.
I think it's your laptop, Paris. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Let me know
Hold
if
on one sec.
we want Aaron to go, which is fine.
Sure.
All right, we'll let them sort that. Aaron, you are up. You've got
Great.
5 minutes or less.
I can, yeah, okay, sure. So, gonna share desktop. Okay, so welcome to this week's contributor tip of the week. This will be the super non-controversial, very straightforward one answer to rule of what do LGTM and approve really mean, and what do they really do, and how do they work. I'm completely lying, of course. This email thread here that I have linked and I will add to the meeting notes is just an example of how somebody wanted to propose a simple change of this process to one repo, and then lots of people started to express opinions about how it could be done better, or what LGTM means to them, or what approve means to them. There seem to be lots of conflicting answers. So I'm just going to give you my opinion, what works for me. Keep in mind that other people may disagree with me, but I've spent a little bit of time working on this, so hopefully this has some strength. It's fair. Okay, so looking in the meeting notes, when people ask me what are owners files or how do LGTM and approve work with owners files, I often point them to this link, go.cates.io/owners. Go.cates.io is kind of like our UL shortener thing. The owners link, I have tried to put this at the top of any owners file that I find, because it tells you sort of what the file is, why we have them. They're loosely inspired by GitHub's code owners files. They are files that let you list approvers and reviewers. We do have some support for regular expressions, much like GitHub's code owners files. But the thing I'm really trying to scroll down to here is the code review using owners files thing that sort of describes an abstract code review process, which I think is roughly what these are intended to support. So in phase, you submit a PR. In phase 0, our automation suggests reviewers and approvers for the PR using the owners file. So reviewers are people who should have knowledge of the code, and when they say it looks good to them, that's meaningful. And approvers are people who should know a lot more about that code and how it interacts with other parts of the code base. So to say this another way, reviewers should generally be looking for code quality and correctness, for sane software engineering. Are you checking for nil in the right places? Dear God, what have you done with your formatting? Things like that. Approvers should be looking at this more from a holistic perspective. Does this change make sense? Does this change belong here and not over there? Is this change going to be forwards compatible with this thing over here? Is it going to be backwards compatible? Does it clash with some other piece of functionality, et cetera, et cetera? So generally speaking, this is why the approver is the person who has the final say. But it is extraordinarily helpful and speeds the process up if we can split these responsibilities up amongst two people, so that, or one group of people who doesn't necessarily have as much subject matter expertise, at least can go through and look at a lot of the details and the code style stuff. If the code both looks about correct, so looks good to me, and it is approved in that it does the right thing, then that merges. So how do people actually do this? They issue a /approve or /LGTM. So I'm linking here to the help page on prow.cates.io. Anytime the bot posts a comment, it says instructions on how to interact with me here. That'll take you to this page. So this is the description for the approve command. You can issue an approve like this, the /approve. I believe to remove an approve, you /approve cancel. Same thing for LGTM. So LGTM means looks good to me. I can /LGTM cancel. You'll also see there's this approve or request changes thing. I'll get there in a second. let's see here. So I tried to summarize this a little bit for a talk I did at KubeCon in case slides help. So this is the part of our PR workflow where the PR must be approved. And so what the problem that this tries to solve is making sure that the right people are looking at your PR, not that you have random drive-bys looking at your PR. So although we do encourage new members to the Kubernetes community to contribute by reviewing PRs, this is why we let them /LGTM. The reason we put certain people in owners files, I'm just going to go to one real quick. The reason, like, I have George and Guinevere and Ihor in the contributors guide owners file is because I think they know the most about the contributors guide when it comes to reviewing it. But the reason I think George and Paris have the final say on the contributors guide is because they are owners of that sub-project. And so they should ultimately have the final say. But I think it would be totally acceptable if anybody with a contributor experience or anybody within the community decided to take a look and make sure that it read grammatically correctly, things of that nature.
Talk.
I think I am over time at this point. Okay. So the one last thing I just wanted to show real quickly, that thread generated a long thing because it made the LGTM command just LGTM and the approve command just approve, and it also turned off implicit approval for some repos, but not all of them. So here's an example where I am in the owners file for the root of K community. I pushed a PR and the bot has not magically added any labels or anything. If I /LGTM, it's not going to do anything because I'm not allowed to say my own PR looks good. However, because I am an approver, I can say that I think this is a correct change to be made, but I really need somebody, see the bot's even telling me I can't LGTM my own PR, but I can approve my own PR. If I refresh, I'm sure I'll see the label, maybe, but I need somebody else to go check this. This is like great for me because I don't want to abuse my power of being in the root owners file, especially in repos like community where their SIGs have stuff all over the place. And I might want to sanity check that content looks good for a SIG, but I don't necessarily want it to go in without their final say. Anyway, that has been this week's contributor tip of the week. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. And I think we've got the technical issues sorted out. Paris, we good?
Can we get a sound check?
Nope. Still getting feedback from you. Okay. Tim, in the meantime, Tim?
Can folks see my screen?
Yep. Thank you.
All right. 1 second here.
While you prep, what we'll do is we'll do a SIG update and then just kick back to the release as we can.
All right. So I'm here to give an update for Sig Cluster Lifecycle. I don't know why it does this to me. So one of the things that is often confusing is understanding the charter of the SIG. One of the things we did in the last cycle is we actually formalized and put our full charter up there. And it's important to understand the mission, and I have 2 quips that I often say about what it is that we actually do. So Sig Cluster Lifecycle's objective is to simplify creation, configuration, upgrade, downgrade, and tear down of Kubernetes clusters and their components. What does that actually translate to? We spend a lot of time trying to balance user experience versus power and flexibility of deploying clusters from the scale of 1 to n to make it seamless. That's what we really do. We spend a lot of time, sort of debating back and forth, as well as coming up with different ways and means to do this. And this occurs across a number of different tools, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So what did we do this last cycle? We did a ton of stuff. There's a link to the change log for our SIG in the 112 cycle. One of the most notable things is our configuration has changed last cycle from V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3. Our configuration for kubeadm that we use is a well-versioned style that's very analogous to component config. We want to do this so that we make sure that upgrades are pretty seamless. And we use API machinery for a lot of that work. What other things we do? We did improve CRI handling, better air gap support, better cert management. And one of the things we've been continually working on over time is kind of refining how we want to do HA deployments over and over and over again to the point where to make it as simple, as clean, and as manageable as we can. As I mentioned earlier, we have several sub-projects. There are two kind of keystones that kind of apply to several of the other ones, Kubernetes being one and Cluster API being another. Cluster API has added a whole bunch of different providers in this last cycle. That includes like DO, AWS, OpenStack, vSphere. There's been some changes to switch back to CRDs. And there's been good progress towards the alpha release. We have kind of slow rolled the initial alpha release for this next cycle, or for the release of Cluster API, in part because of the CRD migration. So originally it was using aggregated API servers, and now it's switched back to CRDs. What are some of the plans for the upcoming cycles? Sig Cluster Lifecycle is growing and growing and growing. There are new projects that are coming online, and we want to make sure, as SIG leads or chairs, however you want to say it, we're trying to help sponsor these projects and make sure that they find a good, happy home with appropriate owners, and that they can grow and foster a good community around that. So we've been spending a lot of time in switching some of our standard meetings around, so that way we have a venue by which all the sub-projects can report out information, and we can help to coordinate that effort across the sub-projects too as well. One of the ones I'll talk about a little later is the addition of a new sub-project which Justin Santa Barbara had piloted around etcd management called etcd ADM. Also this cycle, we are moving kubeadm to GA. Part of that switch to GA is changing our configuration to beta. So we're trying to finalize our last minute changes to the configuration format that we have for configuring kubeadm. But the command line options that we specify to kubeadm will be fully supported GA features. So part of that is switching a lot of the things that were underneath phases into their proper homes, which includes init. And over the next cycle, we will also migrate some phases to join. So if those who are familiar with kubeadm understands that there's two primary sort of workflow scenarios. If you're initializing a control plane node, you do init, and if you're initializing a worker node, you're basically joining the cluster. For Cluster API, we are trying to push out that alpha release. There's a lot of end-to-end test migration. We still have a lot of questions that we need to figure out as a community of how we want to push all of these artifacts across all of these different repos in some way that's consumable to external people. That's an ongoing challenge. And we're also looking to integrate across different sub-projects. So Cluster API being used by COPS and being used by other tools. In a very analogous thing too is when you walk down to KubeSpray, is they are actually integrating with kubeadm being a default deployment. Hopefully, now that Lucas is even on the call today, we will eventually, hopefully, get back to working on some of the grander schemes that have occurred over time, which is moving to component configuration for all of the different components inside of Kubernetes.
So I can quickly say something about that. So last cycle was 112. Myself and a couple of other contributors created a CAP, and for this refactoring, essentially we want to, in the same way as kubeadm has its file-based API for configuration, we want to do the same for the other components like kubeproxy. Kubelet already has this good, well in place, but also, like for example, the API server doesn't have any kind of, it can't read from a file, neither can the controller manager. So there's a lot of internal refactoring and restructuring of the code needs to be done in order to make all components support the same uniform API for configuration as well.
Yeah, and there is a CAP that folks can reference, and we'll get to some of that at the end. Some more information about what we have planned. We are trying to move Kube up over time and trying to deprecate a lot of the tests and issues that have occurred over time. We're also trying to deprecate Kubernetes Anywhere from being a default deployer for part of our CI signal. It's kind of limped along for several releases. Anybody who knows me knows that I've not been a fan of this, but it's done its job. So over time, we will probably replace it with a bunch of periodic jobs for different providers for implementations across the state space of subprojects that we are looking at. Just as this is, Robert added the slide just as a PSA for folks of anyone who's been on the release team has known that there are many tests that apply to Sig Cluster Lifecycle, but not all of them apply to all the different subprojects. So we wanted to make sure that, yes, we are well aware that there are SKU tests that exist inside of them, and they're highly valuable. But sometimes Sig Cluster Lifecycle, in particular, some other people like Robbie are primarily responsible for routing. They are not necessarily responsible for the failures themselves, because a lot of times there's a question of ownership for some of these tests. So if you see a test failing with regards to the SKU upgrade tests, please be advised that even though it says Sig Cluster Lifecycle on the name, that not all parties are responsible, and not even all leads will know where it leads to, right? So please poke for routing first, and we'll try to help make sure that can land in the proper location to get fixed. Another thing that's upcoming that folks have been working on is add-ons or bundles. There are a number of different features for Kubernetes that are sort of above the basic control plane. These things are what are lovingly referred to as add-ons. These include things like the DNS and even things like the proxy. So if you are very interested in understanding of how we want to do add-on management in the future, you should go see the KubeCon talk that Justin and Jeff have coming up in Seattle, and also check out the link in their talk. They'll talk about bundles and the separate project that Google has been starting with regards to how they want to do well-versioned, well-defined add-on management. As mentioned earlier, one of the subprojects that we've added on recently and we just voted on this week was the addition of an etcd management utility. This will be a separate utility, very analogous to how kubeadm functions. If you are interested, please take a look at the pull request listed below. We had voted on it and it's been approved, so we hope to have traction on this and repo set up in the coming weeks. Where can you find us? Highly recommend the contributor website that I know the Contribex folks had set up. There's details inside there. We try to make sure it's up to date and maintained, how to contact Sig Cluster Lifecycle or any of the assorted subprojects below that. I know there's a separate section for shoutouts, but I wanted to make sure I give a separate shout out to the SIG in particular, because I've known and worked with these folks now for several years, and they're a great group. This is by no means exhaustive list, but I just wanted to make sure I give a hearty applause to those who have been contributing. And I also want to give a special shout out to Ben the Elder. He has done awesome work and has helped us several times across between tests or setting up new infrastructure that actually leverages our subcomponents. So with that, I'll hand it back off and see if there's any questions.
We've got 1 minute for questions. Anybody?
So I don't know if you answered this in the slide before. You talked about deprecating Kubernetes Anywhere and KubeUp, but I'm trying to figure out what would be the standard deployer that I could use today to when kubeadm goes GA, what's it going to go GA with?
Your question makes me want to ask more questions.
I guess
so kubeadm, I highly recommend reading the details for the individual subprojects about what they're responsible for. There are several different deployment tools. You can use different deployment tools such as kubespray, which then backs against kubeadm.
I guess I would ask the question this way. Right now, I think if I go to Kubernetes website, I can curl get gates.io, pipe it into bash. We all know that's a really super awesome development practice. So what would the kubeadm version of that thing be?
That's documented on the website. So we have plethora of documentation for how to set up, stand up, and use the different subprojects and tools.
Okay.
So I highly recommend going to the Kubernetes website, and there's even an entire set of pages around management administration, how you set up, how you tear down, how you upgrade for different versions of KubeADM.
But to also clarify, the scope of KubeADM is way less than kind of what you asked for. Like in this case of Kubernetes Anywhere, it's just existed as a like E2E test provider for like soon several years. It's not being used actively for spinning up new real clusters. But anything that can spin up real clusters that are based on KubeADM, it has this whole cluster view, and KubeADM only sees the local machine that it's executing on. So it has way smaller scope, and it's only responsible for one task, which is like writing files to disk. So the Kubernetes components can.
So something like KubeSpray might be a more reasonable replacement, or maybe one of the like cluster API provider projects. Then
yes,
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So like
it's a layered approach.
Yeah, exactly. So the cluster API is there won't be like this standard official Kubernetes deployer that has the whole cluster view. Instead, what we kind of decided on is that we'll define the standard for the whole cluster view API. That is a cluster API that says this is the whole cluster thing, and I can describe it and customize it. And that I then give it to whatever KubeSpray or like GKE or AKS or EKS or whatever deployment that talks the cluster API. And then I also can, like, using nearly the same spec, use different vendors or like specialized approaches to do this thing. But KubeADM is all the base layer for this.
Yep. And we have time for one more question. Mo would like to ask, what was the reasoning for moving from an aggregated API to CRDs?
There were several reasons, but the most highly beneficial one was management. If you have CRDs, you can apply it to any other clustered environment which you're using already. I think it's the maturity and the path forwards that also helps us too as well.
Okay. Aish, are you ready over there? Welcome back, Lucas, by the way. It's good to see you.
Hey, can you guys hear me fine? Awesome. Cool. So finally, release update for 1.13. So we are beginning to get into the weeds of this really short release. We cut our beta 0 yesterday, and we have our release branch. We had a day of delay due to some failing tests, which we triaged and decided were not blockers. So we now have the 1.13 release branch, and we have all the CI there, which is still stabilizing a little bit. The main update, and we also updated Go to use 1.11.2, which is the latest version. We assessed and we found we don't see any scalability concerns with that. So we went ahead with that. The big dates are we are approaching Code Slush, which is tomorrow, end of day tomorrow, PST. So all PRs that will be going in post 5 p.m. PST tomorrow need to have priority, kind, SIG, and milestone labels. So please make sure you add them, or ping any of the release team folks if you want the milestone added. And the next big date is Code Freeze, which is just a week away. Right now, looking at the enhancement status, we are leaning towards yellow, because though most of the enhancements have just docs and test PR spending, there are a few big ones that have a lot of PR still in progress. So one request to the enhancement owners is, please update your enhancement issues with the latest status, and so that the release team can know when to reach out for an exception, or if we need to move it to the next release. That said, the next one is CI Signal. I've linked to the latest Signal report there. Again, the status there remains yellow. thanks to Cluster Lifecycle for fixing, and Justin Santibarbara for fixing some of the long-standing setup issues there. The good news is issues are getting attention and are being resolved, but we are seeing new issues being added, failing tests and flakes being open mainly because of a lot of PRs being merged at this point in the cycle. I've listed, again, in the notes that I've listed some top failing tests that will become blockers as we near code freeze. So the standing request is for owners to please take a look at those and investigate and resolve them as soon as possible. Finally, at this point, we are starting to stress a lot more on docs and release notes as well. Docs are looking good. We have about 7 outstanding PRs that still need docs. So our docs lead team will be reaching out, and the call out here is please, for those who know that who are still working on their docs PRs, please try to get them in initial draft at least as soon as possible. And a heads up is we have our initial release notes draft, and we plan to send it out for review to all the SIG leads next Monday. So you please expect the release notes to come your way, and if you can leave early feedback on both the notes and release themes, that will really help us wrangle all of that. That's about it. I will come back with more updates next week.
I have a quick question. Where should we be sending volunteers that are looking for 1.14?
Yes, we just were talking about that in the release Slack channel. Stephen Augustus, he's going to get the ball rolling with an issue, and we'll have call for nominations. We're also talking about having a kind of an informal interview process for shadows as well. So we're kind of ironing out a few things there, but watch out for the issue being opened by Augustus, and I will link the issue in the next week's update as well.
Okay, any other release questions?
I wanted to say we're just now starting to gather volunteers for the 1.14 release team. So contact the SIG release channel and or Stephen Augustus if you're interested in being a member of the 1.14 release team.
Great, thanks. Any other questions before we move on? Sig OpenStack. Chris, all you. You're muted. There you go.
All right, there we go. Okay, this will be a fairly short update. So I'm Chris Hodge from Sig OpenStack. So with the completed work in 1.12, it was actually mostly just bug fixes with a few enhancements. The entry driver is deprecated and will go away soon. Actually, our hope was to have this done for 1.12, but it turned out to be a little bit more work than we were able to fit into this time, largely because we have existing API contracts that we still have to make sure that we support. So there's some tricks in moving code into staging and make sure we don't have circular dependencies to externalize the actual implementation of those. For those of you who are using Manila, we have now a Manila provisioner, as well as support for CSI version 0.3.0 in both Manila and Cinder drivers. A number of load balancer enhancements, and a lot more that are all listed in the 1.12 changelog. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the previous update, but Magnum is a Kubernetes certified installer. So if you're running an OpenStack cloud, Magnum is actually being used in production. It's what CERN is using to operate their private Kubernetes deployments on top of their OpenStack cloud. And last I checked, they had several hundred Kubernetes clusters being managed by this tool. So if you're running an OpenStack cluster and you want to have managed Kubernetes, that's a great tool to use. And we also have a driver in the works for Sig Cluster Lifecycle for the cluster API. Future work. There's still new driver work in progress. So for the Heat and Cinlin-based auto-scaling drivers are still in progress. Storage driver consolidation, so that we're going to pull both all the storage drivers into CSI drivers, and continued support for Barbican driver for key and secret management. So the plan was for the code to be removed in the 1.14 release. and work is in progress to remove the code and externalize dependencies without breaking existing contracts for things like Cinder. Also continue to ramp up work with Sig Cluster Lifecycle, and continue to work with Sig Cloud Provider. And hopefully this will actually maybe one of the last updates that Sig OpenStack gives as we transition from Sig OpenStack to a working grow under Sig Cloud Provider. So that's happening. Not only are we removing code, but we're also trying to remove SIGs. So a couple of upcoming events. Next week is the OpenStack Summit in Berlin. We're going to have a working session devoted to OpenStack on Kubernetes. Kubernetes on OpenStack. So if you're going to be in Berlin, you'll be at that event. Make sure you look up the Sig Kubernetes session, as well as a couple of sessions or a session at KubeCon in Seattle. So I think that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions? All right.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. Moving on, we have Sigoff with Mo.
Awesome. Excuse me. Can you guys hear me? Yes? No?
You're good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. And I assume you can see my screen. So I'm Mo Khan. I'm one of the Sig Auth chairs. So I have a pretty short presentation, small updates here and there. So starting out strong, this is probably my most favorite thing ever in a really long time. So we are working to transition service accounts to using projected volumes. What that means for end users is effectively we are moving away from a secret-based storage of the service account token to an ephemeral token that is tied to the lifetime of the pod, and it is also time-based. It is continuously and automatically rotated by the kubelet. So the benefits from that is there's very little chance of a compromise being held sort of out long-term, whereas the current secrets are basically permanent, and the only thing you can do is basically delete the service account to kind of, if you feel that there's been a compromise. In this case, they'll be continuously rotated. The biggest problems we do see coming with this is if you don't use client Go today and you're an in-cluster client, you do need to keep reading the token off of disk. The kubelet will continue to refresh it. And in a similar problem we have noticed is that things like PSPs and stuff, if they were previously using a secret volume and restricting all other forms of volumes, they will restrict the projected volume. So we're trying to work through this right now. The linked issue does kind of track how we plan on proposing this and kind of the rollout of it. So if you're interested in this or you're heavily relying on this, we'd love your feedback. So the next thing is we are working towards restricting what labels kubelets can self-apply. The primary reason for this is we don't want a node that's been compromised to be able to self-label itself in a way that directs workloads to it. So you can imagine a PII-based workload that you have dedicated nodes based on auditing requirements and such. And we don't want a compromise of one node to compromise every workload in your cluster. So the current proposal is effectively to pick two reserved namespaces for Kubernetes, which cannot be set by the kubelet, and then allow end users, such as CSI and any other consumers, to set whatever labels they like outside of that. And we plan on doing this over a period of time. And it is only active if you decide to use the node restriction plugin. If for some reason you are unconcerned, you have an isolated environment and this isn't a problem for you, you can just disable the mission plugin and you will not have any of this imposed on you. And the last thing I wanted to discuss is we have the alpha of the dynamic audit configuration. This allows you to create a resource which effectively states an audit sync. This is very useful when you have HA clusters. It's hard to manage on-disk configurations that you need to keep perfectly in sync across multiple masters. and obviously any file-based configuration requires a restart of the API master. So this will be really useful in those types of situations, especially when you just want to have a small amount of new things audited for some period of time. Perhaps you're concerned about something. So we're looking forward to using this. So in terms of governance, we have formally defined our subprojects. Those are listed there. I won't go over them in detail. But as you can see, we have quite a lot. So if anyone wants to get involved with this, we have plenty of work to do. We welcome you. And in a similar vein, I myself, Mo, have been added as a chair for Sigoff. Jordan Liggett recently transitioned into the tech lead role. He is still around. We can still get a hold of him and have him do all sorts of fun things. And the working group for container identity is winding down for us. The primary things we got out of that was the token request API, which is what we were using with the service account bit that I talked about earlier. That's been the primary reason for winding this down is we did feel like the intersection between Sigoff and container identity was basically the same, and we didn't want the overhead of an entire separate meeting. And we do have a good path moving forward. The token request stuff is going to be pretty influential down the line. And we did have some meetings with the SAFE group, which has since merged with work group policy. We haven't necessarily had any formal arrangement for closer collaboration, but we are interested in working with them. They have some fun things down the line too. And you can find us primarily on Slack is probably the best way to get to us, and you can certainly email the list. We do respond. It's pretty quiet, so it's not hard to get a response from us. That's all I got. You got any questions?
Questions? All right, thanks, Mo. And I'd just like to point out that we did use the working group winding down to kind of beta test our sunsetting of work groups process. So if you're interested in that, as everything keeps on churning upstream, feel free to ping us. All right, with that, we're going to move on to the announcements. Contributor Summit at KubeCon. Let's go over Shanghai first. Josh, do you have anything to say before you get on your plane?
Nope, just see folks in Shanghai if you're going. And again, Contributor Social Tuesday night, if you are a Kubernetes contributor at the conference center. So drop by the conference center at 4:45, pick up your badge, and head over to the social, which will be the only activity at that hour, so you should be able to find it.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to Seattle, just a reminder, chairs and owners, if you haven't confirmed that you're coming to the Contributor Summit, please let us know. I think at this point, the best thing for you to do, because we're running out of time, is just ping myself or Paris directly, and we will let you know what's going on with that. Paris, do you have anything to add about Seattle? Nope, we are good. Okay, community meeting schedule. I'm just going to give some quick bookkeeping here. For November 22nd, that's going to be Thanksgiving in the US. We're still going to do a community meeting. Ihor will be your host, so those of you that are not on holiday, you're more than welcome to come and participate. We're going to try to do the release retro at 12/6. We try to do it as soon after release as possible, but that's tentative, so we will be as flexible as we can be there. December 13th will be actually at KubeCon, so there's no meeting that week. And what we're going to do is for December 20th and 27th, we're just going to close out the years without meetings. Everyone can celebrate new version of Kubernetes and a great year. When we come back for January, the first SIGs up for status updates at this meeting will be SIG Apps, SIG UI, and SIG VMware. Does anybody else have any announcements or anything before we move on to the shoutouts? Aaron.
I guess since you mentioned holidays, I'll do a quick one. Steering committee decided during a meeting yesterday, we're not going to have a meeting in 2 weeks since that's so close to Thanksgiving, but we will be having a meeting December 5th prior to KubeCon. We are going to be pushing really hard to make sure every SIG has their charters written and submitted. So some of you may have noticed I've been poking you, or you've gotten pokes from other steering committees members. That is why my suggestion to you would be to get a charter drafted by the end of next week so that we can have some time to review it prior to Thanksgiving and some time after Thanksgiving and see where we are at. Because I just think it would be really great to stand up at the Contributor Summit and say that we know what y'all do here now because it's all written down. Thank you for that. It only took us a year. It would be really great.
Okay, and any other announcements? All right, we're going to move on to the shout-outs real quick. This section is just basically if you see someone doing something above and beyond the Call of Duty, hop into #shoutouts in Slack and mention them, and then we'll read their name aloud so they can get recognition from the community. This week, Paris and Jace would like to thank Matt Farina, who just spent an hour helping organize their project boards. Josh Burkus would like to do some shout-outs for the people who helped plan the Shanghai Summit. So Megan Len for doing all the logistics and legwork from thousands of kilometers away. Puya Jiangpeng Zhao, I hope I get that right, and at Ideal Hack for translating all the new Contributor Summit materials and many other things besides. Also to Mr. Bobby Tables and our localization volunteers for getting the international forums at discuss.kubernetes.io launched. This would be a good time to remind everybody that the CNCF has taken the time. We have now translated the Code of Conduct into multiple languages. So if you're interested in that, let me know. You'll find the Code of Conduct language in the typical place. Aish would like to shout out to Josh Burkus and his team for CI Signal Shadows, at Maria and at Moretent for staying on top of CI Signal failures and flakes every day, opening and following up on test issues and fixes and helping maintain stable test health for 1.13. Jace Dumars would like to thank Aaron, at Dims, and Matt Farina, all of whom have stepped up and helped with the work in SIG architecture. Maui Lion, that's Duffy, would like to shout out to Jason DeTiber for always finding time to help dig into the cluster API stuffs. And Aish would like to double dip and shout out to Justin Santa Barbara, yet again. I think that's 3 weeks in a row. A shout out for Justin for extremely quick turnaround on a long-standing upgrade testing issue. This helped us get clean end-to-end CI coverage for the 1.13 beta feature, taint-based evictions. And with that, we're about 9 minutes early. Does anyone have any announcements or last-minute hey-yous before we break? All right, and with that, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We'll give you 8 minutes back and see everyone later. Have a happy Thursday.